In this lecture, we are going to develop Kill the Ghost game in the game lab on code.org. So the first thing that we are going to start with is adding the required sprites in the animation workspace of game lab. So we need to come on this animation workspace first. Let's hit this new animation tab. So automatically we are going to get redirected on this beautiful animation library. Let's search for a relevant background from this backgrounds group over here. So these are a couple of good backgrounds you're going to come across. Now let's select one of these backgrounds. Let's go for this one. Okay. So I am done with selecting the required background. Now let's rename this sprite to BG. So I'm going to use this one for the background of my game. Now let's hit this new animation tab and add another sprite in this animation workspace. So now I would like to add a sprite in which there is a person holding a sword in his hand. Can we get something like that from this animation library? Let's check out this fantasy group. So these are a couple of good sprites which you're going to come across when you'll visit this fantasy group of animation library. Let's select this one. Fine. So this is going to be our sword player. So I have renamed it to sword. Let's now come on this new animation tab and add two more sprites. So now I'm going to add two enemy sprites. Let's select this one. Okay. And let's add one more enemy sprite. Let's go for this one. Okay. So I am done with adding all the four required sprites in this animation workspace. Now I'm going to rename this enemy sprite with sprite 1. Okay, so I have renamed it to sprite 1, and this one I am going to rename it to sprite 2. Okay, so I am done with adding all the four sprites as well as renaming all of them. Let's now come on this coding window and define the code for accessing all the four sprites on this playground. So the first thing that I would like to define here in this workspace is the code which can help us in fetching the background over here on this playground. Let's come on this sprite section and make use of these two blocks for getting the background over here on this playground. I am renaming this variable to BG, and this one also we need to rename to BG. Let's convert it back into block based coding, and from this drop down over here we need to select BG. Now let's come on this world area. I need to define this back function draw over here, and for drawing this sprite I need this draw sprites block. So I need to define it inside this function draw, right? So now when you will run this game, this is what you are going to get as an output. I am able to get this beautiful image in the background of this game, right? Let's reset this game. Now we are going to define the code for bringing this player, this sword player, on this playground. So for doing that we need to first copy these two lines of code and let's paste it over here just before this function draw. Okay, and here we need to replace the name of the variable. Let's make use of this sword variable. We need to replace this one also with sword. Let's convert it into block based coding, and here we need to set the animation for this variable sword to sword. Let's run this game and see what is the output we are going to get. So as you can see, the player is visible to us over here on this playground, but the size of this player is pretty big. We need to scale it down, right? So how can we scale down the size? As you guys know about it very well, we will come on the sprite section And now we are going to make use of this sprite.scale block for scaling down the size of the sword player. Let's define a size somewhere around 0.6. How about if I'll make it 0.5? So this is how you're going to see the player on this beautiful playground now. Initially when the user will start the game, I don't want him to see the player right in the middle. Okay, I would like him to see the player somewhere down over here. So how can we bring him down? We just have to change the coordinates. So I'm going to change the value of this x to 64 and let's change this one to 330. So this is where you are going to see the player now. Now we need to define the code for bringing the enemy sprite on this playground. For that we have to copy these lines of code. Let's paste it over here. So for bringing the first enemy sprite over here, what we can do, we need to replace the name of the variable with something like, let's replace it with sprite1. Okay, and here also we need to replace the sword with sprite1. Let's convert it into block based coding and select sprite1 from this drop down. Right. So now when you'll run this game, this is what you'll get to see. So the enemy is visible to us, right? I don't want this sprite to be visible to the user in the beginning of the game. Okay, so for hiding it initially, what we can do, we can play with the coordinates. We can change the coordinates. So I'm changing the value of x to 500 because the playground is of 400 by 400. So if I will define 500 or a value greater than 450 over here, what is going to happen? That sprite will not be visible to the user when he will run the game initially. So see, that sprite1 is not visible to us right now. Okay, so that's how we can hide any sprite. As soon as the user begins the game, I would like to see this sprite1 coming towards this sword player. For doing that, we can impart some velocity to this sprite1. So what the best way is to make use of this velocity x component. Now why I am using this velocity x component? Because I want the sprite to travel along the x-axis. Let's replace it with sprite1. And here I am going to define a velocity of -10. Now when you will run this game, this is what you are going to see. Okay, so the sprite is pretty big, right? Let's scale down the size of sprite1. So I'm scaling it down to 0.3. So this is how it is going to look like now. Fine, so it is perfectly fine. Let's reset this game. Now let's define a code with which we can bring that second enemy sprite also on this playground. So for doing that, we are going to copy this code and let's put it over here just before this function draw. Now I'm going to replace all the sprite ones over here with sprite 2. Okay, and let's set the animation also for this sprite 2 variable. So I need to set it to sprite 2. Perfect. Now I would like to see this coming from somewhere over here. So let's change the coordinates of this sprite 2. I'm going to let's make it 396 on the x-axis. Okay, 396 on the x-axis, 90 on the y-axis. So now this is how you will get to see both the enemies, right? Now if you want to see that enemy sprite 2 traveling diagonally, so for doing that, we just have to add this sprite.velocity y component over here. And let's copy this sprite 2 and place it in place of this sprite. Now I'm going to impart a velocity to this sprite 2 component along the y-axis also. So I am giving it 5. So now this is how you'll get to see both the enemies coming towards this sword player like this. Okay, so this is working perfectly fine right now. Let's reset this game. Now I'm going to define the code with which I can control the movement of this player in all the directions. For that, we are going to come on this control section and let's define this if loop over here. Now when the user will hit this upward direction key, I would like the user to see this player going upwards. So for doing that, what we can do, see the variable in which we have stored this sprite is sword. So I'm going to put this sword over here because we want this to move along the y-axis in upward direction. So what is happening when I am moving this cursor over here on this playground in upward direction? The value of y is decreasing. So that is the reason we need to assign to this sword.y this value sword.y minus 5. Okay, so every time the user will now hit this upward direction key, he will be able to see it moving upwards. And as soon as he will release the key, the player will stop at that point. Okay. Similarly, for controlling the movement of this sword player in downward direction, we can copy this code and paste it over here like this. And let's replace this up with down. So when the user will hit this downward direction key, what is happening when I'm bringing my cursor downwards like this? The value of y is increasing. So that is the reason we need to replace this minus with plus. Now when you'll run this game, you will be able to move this player in both the directions like this. In order to control the movement of this player along x-axis, what we can do, we can copy these lines of code and we can paste it just below these code. Let's replace this up with left. So when the user will hit this left direction key, now what is happening when I am moving my cursor in the left direction? As you can see, the value of x is changing. Okay, it is constantly decreasing. However, the value of y is going to remain the same. Why? Because movement is taking place along the x-axis. So that is the reason we need to subtract something from sword.x. Similarly, when the user will hit the right direction key, what we can do, we can replace these y's with x. Rest everything is going to remain the same. Why? Because when I am moving my cursor in the right direction on this playground, so the value of x is changing and it is rapidly increasing, right? So that is the reason I have placed plus over here. Let's reset this game and see whether we'll be able to move the player in all the four directions or not. So now, as you can see, I'm able to move the player in all the directions. If you want to move it diagonally, you can press two direction keys together like this and it will start moving diagonally like this. Fine, so you can now move the player in all the directions. Now let's reset this game. Now I'm going to define the code for the collision part. What should happen when the sword will hit the enemy sprite? For that, we are going to define the code now in this workspace of GameLab. Let's come on this controls part first of this toolbox. I'm going to pick this if block and put it over here. Now here inside this if loop, I am going to make use of that is touching block, which we can easily find in the sprite section of the toolbox. So this is the one. First of all, I'm going to define the code for checking the collision between sprite 1 and the sword player. So when the sprite 1, that is enemy sprite, will touch this sword player, what will happen? I would like that sprite to get destroyed. So for destroying that sprite, we can make use of this sprite.destroy block. Okay, and here we need to replace this sprite with 1, right? Okay, now let's run this game and see whether we'll be able to get the required output or not. So as you can see, when this sword player touched that enemy sprite 1, that sprite disappeared from this playground. What does that mean? It means that it was destroyed by the sword player, like this. Okay, let's reset this game now and define the code for the collision between sprite 2 and sword player. So we can copy this whole code like this and paste it right below this if loop. Here we just have to replace this 1 with 2 like this. Now let's run this game and check out what is the output we are going to get. So as soon as the sprites will touch this sword player, they will go disappear, or you can say they will get destroyed automatically. Okay, let's make this game more interactive. So for doing that, we can add some sound to these collision if loops. Let's come on this world area, and from here we are going to pick this play sound block and put it inside this if block. Let's convert it into block based coding, and from this drop down over here we are going to get redirected on this sound library of GameLab. From here we are going to select a relevant sound. Let's search for some blast kind of sound. When you'll type this blast over here, automatically these are some of the sound clips you're going to come across. Let's hear this. Okay, so this is perfectly fine, right? Let's go for this. For selecting this sound clip, you just have to click on this, and after that you have to come here on this choose button. Click on this choose button and automatically the sound is going to get added like this over here. Let's copy this code and put it inside this if loop also. Now when you'll run this code, you will be able to get the required output. Okay, so this is what you will get to hear when the sprites will collide with this sword player. So as you can see, the enemy sprite are now destroyed by this sword player. How about if we can create those ghost enemy sprite and at any point of time? Let's do that. Let's reset this game. Now here inside this function draw, I am going to define one more if loop like this. Now let's come on this world area and select this key down block. So let's configure it in this way. So when the player will hit the X key, I would like the ghost 1 image to get created again. So how can we create a new sprite over here? What we can do, we can copy these 4 lines of code, okay, and we can paste it over here inside this if loop like this. Okay, and we need not to declare this sprite1 variable again because it is already globally declared by us right on the top in this workspace. Right, let's come down. Fine. So now I'm going to convert it back into block based coding. Okay, and in place of this -10, let's assign a random value to this velocity x component of sprite1 and see what is going to happen. So I'm going to assign it a value somewhere between -10 and -20. -10 -20. Let's run this game and see what is going to happen. So as you can see, both the sprites are now destroyed by this sword player. Now when I will press X button, which is there on my keyboard, this is what we are going to get as an output. So that sprite 1 is going to appear again on the playground like this. Every time you'll press this X button, the sprite is going to get generated and it is going to be visible to the user on the playground like this. Okay, let's reset this game and do the same thing for the sprite 2 also. So I'm going to copy this whole code. Let's put it over here. So now it's a two-player game. Okay, so the second player is going to shoot the sword player with the enemy sprite, with the ghost sprite, you can say. So we need to replace this X with Z. And now let's copy this whole code from here, which we have defined right on the top in this workspace for fetching the sprite 2, that is ghost, second ghost sprite on this playground, and paste it over here inside this if loop. Now when you'll run this game, this is what you will get as an output. So both the sprites are now destroyed. Let's hit the Z key. Okay, now let's hit the X key. Let's hit Z key. Okay, now I'm going to hit this player with sprite 1, sprite 2, sprite 1, Z, X, Z, X, Z, X. So, that's what is the output you are going to get. Fine, isn't it beautiful? Yes, it is. This is how you can develop a beautiful kill the ghost game in the game lab. Hope you guys enjoyed this lecture a lot. Thank you very much for watching this video. God bless you and have a great day. Bye bye.